Hello there, this is Ben Crosland, and I'm honoured to be doing this guest review for the wonderful people at Sonic State. The product I'm reviewing, in case you clicked on this by mistake, is the new synth by Hive, which they're calling Hive. And for this review, I'm running it in Logic Pro X on a late 2012 Mac Mini i7 quad-core. So what's the basic concept here? Well, as seasoned purveyors of high-quality instruments and effects, Hive are keenly aware of two factors that can be a hindrance to creativity when using software synthesizers. One is the hit on CPU that you often get with high-quality instruments, and the other is complexity, which may be appealing to us synthesists on one level, but doesn't always work to the advantage of those of us with deadlines or kids to take to school first thing in the morning. So what they've tried to do with Hive is create an instrument that's easy to get your head around, doesn't compromise on sound quality, but also won't choke your CPU when you try and play more than 2 notes at a time. So let's see how they've approached this. I'll just select an init patch. So basically Hive consists of 2 parallel virtual analog synths. We've got one on the left and the other on the right over here. And they're both controlled by a mod matrix. We've got 2 rows with 6 slots in each. That was quite difficult to say. And we've got an arpeggiator and step sequencer and a multi-effects section. So let's start by looking at the oscillators. So if you click on the waveform here, you'll see we have a list of the usual suspects in virtual analog synthesis: sawtooth, triangle, and pulse. Also a sine wave, which is always nice to see. And we also have square, half, and narrow. Now these are basically preset pulse widths because Hive haven't provided a dedicated control for the pulse width. So that's the square, this is half, and narrow. You've also got 2 types of noise, white and pink. And the unison parameter allows you to choose up to 16 instances of any of these waves. So we'll do the obligatory 16 sawtooths. We want to detune them, of course. And you can also determine the stereo spread of those waves with the width parameter. And we also have a very powerful sub-oscillator. You'll see this little window here with an equal sign in it, and that means that the sub-oscillator is basically mirroring the main oscillator. So we've got 16 detuned saws as well for the sub. Let's hear what that sounds like. I'll enable sub in the filter there and turn it up. And you can also choose any interval offset for the sub-oscillator from 2 octaves below. If you double click on it, it goes back to the default of -1 octave. So this makes it very powerful. If you choose any of the other specific waves, you'll get a single instance of that. So, you know, a more typical thing would probably be to use something like a triangle wave. Okay, if you go back to a single wave, by the way, you want to watch the detune parameter, which doesn't reset to 0 automatically, and so you'll be out of tune. So let's move on to the filter. So I think the first thing you need to get your head around in Hive before you do anything really is these panels in the filter section. We've got one for the first filter here. You can switch the oscillators on and off, and you've got the same kind of thing over here for filter 2. The difference is that we've got a switch for filter 1 as well, and this enables you to route the output of filter 1 through filter 2. And both filters have their own volume control. And this means that you can set up any combination of series, parallel, or a mixture of the two, which makes it very flexible indeed, actually, for synthesizing. So the character of the filters is, of course, something that is critical in any synth. And we've got 3 distinct character types to choose from. We've got normal, dirty, and clean. And I'll choose a little sound here that I made to demonstrate the difference between them. So let's take a look at the different types of filter that are on offer. We've got two types of low pass, a band pass, high pass. I'm going to assume that you all know what they do. A band reject is another name for notch filter. And we've also got a peaking filter, which I didn't know what that was actually to start with, but it seems it's a one-pole band pass. I'll show you what that means. If we detune some saws again, and then sweep the cutoff, you'll hear that nothing actually happens. Until you turn up the resonance. So you get like a kind of a resonance-only filter. And before I move on, the input gain parameter is worth mentioning as well. It's basically a pre-filter volume control. So you can reduce the level of the oscillator mix. Let's just dial up a new sound. And if you take it past 12 o'clock, it'll send the filter into overdrive, which can add some nice grit and warmth to the sound. So let's take a look at the mod matrix now. Each synth channel has its own LFO, amp envelope, and mod envelope. And there's also a dedicated vibrato LFO, which is hardwired to the pitch of both oscillators. And this is pretty useful because it means you don't have to tie up one of the LFOs just to add a bit of vibrato. And I think it's time to mention about these little tabs that you see at the top of each section here. They contain presets. So it means you can save a little bit of time when you're setting up things like envelopes, because they can be a bit fiddly with 4 sliders. So I'll show you how that works. So I go to an init patch and choose something like, try Fat Bottle. Then in filter, I'll go to low pass 24 with full envelope, and amp medium pluck, mod medium pluck. And it's also worth mentioning, I think, that you can set either of the envelopes to be triggered by the LFOs. So I'll show you what that sounds like if we set them up like this. So there's all sorts of rhythmic effects you'll be able to achieve with that. So I'm pleased to say that UHE have done a great job with the mod matrix in Hive. And basically you can modulate up to 24 parameters via any of the modulation sources in this list. Let's choose LFO2 now. And then you click in one of these boxes here to assign 2 parameters to this particular source. So then you drag the little target there. Let's take it to input gain. See what happens. Simple as that. Another way you can do it is just right click on the box and choose from the list, which is actually the way I prefer to do it. So let's choose, say, resonance for this one. You get the idea. You can also choose a second source as a trigger for the main source. So what that means, if I, for instance, select aftertouch, which is called pressure here, there'll be no modulation until I introduce some aftertouch. So most of the mod sources are self-explanatory, I think. I just want to talk about these 3 at the bottom. Random, I expect you know what that is. That's just going to create a random value for every key press. Constant is pretty useful, actually, specifically for the pulse width, because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a dedicated control for that in the oscillator section. So actually, let's initialize the patch again. Okay, so if we choose constant, take that up to wave and choose pulse, we can now specify an exact pulse width. And then there's alternate. If I set this to cutoff, just set the filter up first. Okay, and assign this slot here to cutoff, and give it a little bit of positive offset like that. Now what this is going to do is alternate between the value I've set here and the same value but in the negative domain with each alternate key press. So if you play up and down an arpeggio, it's quite fun. So not something you'd use every day, but I think that's quite a neat little idea. So let's take a look at the effects section now. I have to say I really like the way they've done this. It's very powerful, but also really easy to use. You simply turn on the effects that you want, like so. Let's turn up the distortion. They've given you just enough parameters to do interesting things, but not overload you with unnecessary stuff as well, and every single one of them can be modulated via the matrix like I showed you earlier. But most interestingly, I think you can reorder them. Like, so if you want to put the distortion after the reverb, for example, it's easy, you just do that. And you can quickly disable them or enable them with this button here. Now the arpeggiator offers the standard controls you'd expect, but adds a couple of tricks worthy of special mention. The first is called restart, and let's turn the arpeggiator on first of all, and let's get rid of this alternate thing as well. So we've got simple arpeggiator sound. Now restart allows you to limit the number of notes it will play before it restarts the directional pattern. So the easiest way to see how useful this can be is to set it to 8 and then play a mixture of 3 and 4 note chords. So for example, this, here we are. Now we've also got a step sequencer, which is pretty easy to get going. You just press record, play some notes. And then press play. You'll notice nothing happens yet. This is note triggered, so for every key you press, it takes the first note that you played as a 0 transpose, and then everything else is recorded as an offset. So if I play a G, a C, and you can slur them like this, or turn steps off. Let's turn the gate up as well. Now the interesting thing is that you can also run this in conjunction with the arpeggiator. And you can also set up a modulation sequence here for one of these real-time controllers. It's easy for me to call up a preset that I've already done. So here it's using breath control. You'll see in this row that we've got that controlling the filter cutoff. And this is just a 2-step sequence. If I increase it to 8. And if you click on modulator, you just get the modulation and not the notes. Now for those of you who like to use presets, you'll be delighted to hear that there are well over 2,000 to play with already, with more sure to come. I haven't tried them all, but I can honestly say that I haven't encountered any that aren't top quality. They're clearly categorized and offer useful descriptions from the sound designers to help you get the most from them. So if we choose this pad here, for instance, it says we're going to get a soaring pad with a solid low end, and mod wheel is going to control cutoff. Let's check it out, see if it does what it says on the tin. Yeah, I guess it does. And I've collected some favourites along the way. I'll just run through a few of these now for you. Nice organ sound here. So I'll be honest with you, I wasn't expecting to like Hive all that much. I feared it might be little more than an auto trance kit or something. Not that this would necessarily be a bad thing, but it's just not something I'd be personally all that interested in, if that's all it was. However, Hive have put a lot of thought and attention to detail into this, and they've actually made a surprisingly powerful synthesizer, and certainly I have not detected any compromise when it comes to sound quality, which is the most important thing, I think. There are a couple of things I'd like to see included. For instance, oscillator sync was sacrificed, I think, on the altar of CPU efficiency. I can certainly imagine that adding sync to 16 unison oscillators would eat into the available processing power pretty damn quickly. And I'm also a bit of a sucker for digital waveforms, which I think would increase the palette of sounds enormously. Also, switching patches often results in a fairly prominent click. Depends on the effects, I think. And again, I guess to avoid this would probably take up a lot more CPU, but a user option to enable smoother switching, I think, would be most welcome. I also must confess that I didn't really like the look of it to begin with, but thankfully Hive have provided us with the tools here to customize it a bit. So I'll show you that. It did look like this originally, and it was smaller. I changed the gamma a bit, made it bigger, switched to the honeycomb scheme. It's a bit easier on my eyes. I guess they preferred the blue one. And I'm happy with it now. So I can wholeheartedly recommend this synth to anyone who feels they need something a bit more immediate than many synthesizers offer, but one that will very much reward those bold enough to look beneath the surface for something deeper. So congratulations to Hive on a great new synth, and thanks to the guys at Sonic State for inviting me to do this review. To check out Hive for yourself, go to the UHE website where you can download a trial version. And my overall verdict then is highly recommended. I'm just going to play you out on a sound that I made, if I can find it again. Here we are, so long. And I made this to show you what the CPU hit was like, basically. You see I've put both oscillators to 16-way unison. I've got all the effects on. I'm using most of the mod slots just for the sake of it, really. And I've got it on 16-voice poly at the top here. So I'm just going to hold my sustain pedal down and play 16 notes, and yeah, hope you enjoy it.